It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Reaction Beanie Yo 205. Day in the neighborhood. My brothers and sisters. Thank God it's Friday once again, baby. Thank God it's Friday. Happy Friday to y'all out there, man. Hope y'all doing excelente today, as always. Now, we about to go back to a channel that I know it has been at least a week, maybe a week and a half since we last watched the video from our homeboy. And it's time to go back to him because he just dropped this video 2 hours ago. And that homeboy is Adrian from Coffeehouse Crime. Going back to Adrian, y'all. And the title of the video, The Killer Vampire Who Deformed His Own Face. I don't even know how to say that first or last name, so I'm just gonna let y'all read that part in it. I ain't gonna even try to say that shit. But no, y'all, the thing about the title is, when I first read the title, I thought about, like, I don't know how y'all is out there, but like when I was little, I actually thought vampires were real. I can't even remember what age I got to when I figured out that they was fake. But back when I was like a little child, like 7, 8 years old, I thought that shit was real. I thought vampires actually exist. And the even crazier part is, it's people out here who still like really think they exist. And some of y'all might be listening right now who like, no, they do exist. I don't fucking know. I'm just saying I ain't never seen one in real life. I'll leave that there. I digress. We finna go and get into the story, man. It's 35 minutes long. We in for the long haul with this one. But before we get into it, my people, y'all know what y'all gotta do. Get whatever you might need. Get what you need. We back to the coffee house, my people. Y'all got what y'all need? Y'all ready to go? Then let's fucking go.
It was supposed to be a weekend indoors, eating snacks and watching a fierce storm pass by. But instead, David Glasser would come face to face with the local gang leader Adam Hall. Following multiple unexpected encounters, David had become subjected to months of bullying and terrorization. And unfortunately, the situation was only getting worse by the month. All of this would come to a peak in August 2011, when David and 2 of his friends would eventually be ambushed by 3 cold-hearted killers. And one of them looked like something straight out of a horror movie. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, folks, and welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime. My name is Adrian, and today I have a very strange case for you. We're flying over to the Bay State to look at one of the most disturbing cases in modern-day true crime. And let me tell you, this one is both very bizarre and complex. Now granted, I may have pulled you into this story with the frightening face of Caius Veovis, but let me tell you, he isn't the only bad apple here. If anything, there is a far greater monster to this story. Before we begin, I wanted to let you know that I post true crime and strange cases here weekly, so if that does sound like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing to the channel. And now, with that said, please grab yourself a coffee, put up your feet, and get ready for the deep dive. This is the case of Caius Veovis.
Get whatever you may need.
Boston, baked beans, and the Red Sox. These are 3 of the many things that well and truly put Massachusetts on the map. Despite being the 6th smallest state by landmass, it's one of the most densely populated, and there's very good reason for this. The Old Bay State is profoundly important to American history, modern-day America's research economy, and of course, sports. Games aside, the state is also a global leader in biotechnology, engineering, higher education, and finance, making it the third highest state in the nation when looking at income per capita. Now, most of the money can be found in its capital, Boston, or the state's other large cities including Springfield and Worcester. And this generally means that, when living in Massachusetts, the further east you go, the more expensive the land is. Travel to the western border to a small city named Pittsfield, and one could argue that this place really is the pits. With a median income less than half of the state's average, life here when compared to the larger cities contrasts in a less than favourable way. Sadly, more than 10% of the population here is below the poverty line. Though from what I've personally been told, there is still plenty of opportunities to live a happy and peaceful life here. Casting back to the year 2011, it was in the month of August that, much like other cities near the east coast of America, Pittsfield was bracing itself to experience something rather unusual. Tropical cyclone Hurricane Irene was getting ready to batter North America's coastline, bringing winds of up to 120 miles per hour. Now, most of the damage remained in its southern states, however, Massachusetts would still be in for a very bumpy ride. Many stayed in their homes to ride out the storm, and although Hurricane Irene was a cause for concern, thrill-seekers looked forward to it with silent anticipation. And three of those who were excited to see the storm were local Pittsfield residents David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell. So, while our storm is brewing today, let's talk about our first three characters of the story.
Hey! I stopped it too late, but look at them three characters. Let me just take it back, y'all. Look at these three
Pittsfield
dudes.
residents David Glasser, Edward...
Do they look like they would be friends? Like, do they look like they got anything in fucking common? Like, this is an odd group of people to look like they would be friends unless they was fucking co-workers and became friends like that. But this group just don't match. It really don't. Let's go.
Frampton and Robert Chadwell. So, while our storm is brewing today, let's talk about our first three characters of the story. Located to the northwest of Pittsfield commercial area lies a 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom home on Linden Street. With not much around, the house, which was divided into 2 apartments, was very affordable. And back in the year 2011, one of those apartments was rented out to 2 men named David Glasser and Edward Frampton. David was 44 years old and Edward 58, and the two of them were very good friends who had each other's backs. Unfortunately, both men struggled with developmental disorders, but thanks to support from social services and each other, were able to remain mostly independent. David Glasser held no formal qualifications, but financially he got by just fine. He would often go around town in his pickup truck, selling scrap metal, giving people rides for a fee, or selling used items. And he would often sell the scrap metal or used items to Pullman Scrapyard, which could be found across town. David described himself as mentally and physically challenged. To add to this, he also had diabetes, which sometimes gave the false impression that he was drunk. And he had been wrongfully fired from jobs and treated unfairly in the past because of people's misunderstanding of the issue. And to add to the list of all these misfortunes, he was also estranged from his family at a very young age. But David's hardships taught him to be kind to others, and to cherish those who had the goodness in their heart to stick around. And in return, everyone who did found a very good friend in David. He was a great drummer who had a diverse and eclectic taste in music, appreciating a variety of genres. On one hand, he loved to play rock. However, on the other, he also played gospel at the local church. Moving over to Edward Frampton, he also suffered from developmental issues, but just like David, found solace in his apartment. The wise man was an advocate for living with disabilities, and often educated social workers in their training, describing the many issues he faced in and throughout his life. Edward enjoyed talking to others and had a fun yet quirky sense of humour, which brought joy to most of the people he encountered. Again, just like David, he too had no family connections. He was dropped off at a special needs facility at the age of 5, and unfortunately stayed there until he was in his 20s. It was during the build-up to Hurricane Irene that both David and Edward shared their plans to watch it with their friend Robert Chadwell, a neighbour who lived across the street from the roommates. Robert was in his 40s and was both a father and an avid outdoorsman, and in his free time loved to go fishing and go camping. Liking their idea, Robert asked them if he could join in on their plans, in which the other two gladly agreed. and so all three men went out to purchase beers, snacks and dinner for the weekend ahead. Hurricane Irene was scheduled to pass on Saturday the 27th and Sunday the 28th of August, which was perfect timing for all three men because none of them had plans to work over the weekend. Just a random side note, but I can fully relate to their excitement over a storm. Anyone who lives here in the UK will remember Storm Dennis back in February 2020. I mean, granted, it's not the same as the storms that Americans see, but it was still pretty wild here for the UK. The wind was absolutely crazy that week, and I even remember seeing fences toppling over and trees being ripped out from their roots. All of this was before my YouTube channel as well, and outside of my 9 to 5 job I really didn't have much to do. I remember during that storm I got cozy and played games all weekend. Now obviously these storms can be dangerous, and from a boring point of view they're not good for the economy either. But I think it's the abnormality that makes them fun and quite nostalgic to remember. But all of this fun and excitement would unfortunately be dramatically cut short for our three friends, because halfway through Hurricane Irene's rampage, all three would suddenly disappear.
Oh shit. And it's crazy because when I first looked at it, I thought they were part of I'm thinking like they was possibly the murderers or part of it. It seemed like they the damn victims.
Everything appeared to be fine on the Saturday, and David helped drive a friend across town during the daytime. And during this drive, he seemed relatively happy, though he did express some concern. He was scheduled to testify against a local gang leader in court, and this was due to happen in about 2 weeks' time. After dropping his passenger off, David waved goodbye and returned home. He had made plans to pick him up again on the Monday morning for work, but until then, he was ready to enjoy the storm with friends. At 10:30 PM later that Saturday, David's and Edward's neighbour, Lisa, who resided in the other apartment in the building, asked David if he could move his truck off the shared driveway. Her mother was coming to visit, and she wanted to give her a safe spot to park. David gladly agreed. During this conversation, Lisa noted 4 men in the kitchen, though she didn't know who the 4th man was. Heading to bed for the morning ahead, she was awoken several times to the sounds of thumping and banging. She wasn't sure what was going on downstairs, and alongside the disturbances were 2 unfamiliar voices. Saying that, she could also hear David and Edward talking amongst the discourse. And since she trusted both men, she didn't feel it necessary to check in on them. But the very next morning, when she went to ask them to move the truck again, there was no answer at the door. Peering in from the window, their apartment appeared to be empty, and after trying again later that evening, she was once again met with profound silence. The next day didn't bring any good news either. You see, Edward was supposed to meet a social worker the following Monday morning. However, when she came into work the next day, Edward was nowhere to be seen, and she found it rather surprising that he hadn't left any voicemail either. After failing to reach him by phone, she headed over to the property, and although the TV was on and the truck was parked around the side, no one answered the door and nobody appeared to be home. After poking around outside, she realised that the front door was unlocked, and so, after giving it careful thought, she walked inside to see if anything was amiss. Nothing appeared to be out of the ordinary, but Edward's pillbox for both Monday and Sunday hadn't been touched. And to add to this, his cat, who he loved dearly, hadn't been fed for at least a whole day. Something was very abnormal about this situation, and after checking all hospitals in the local area and not receiving any good results, she decided to file a missing persons report on Tuesday for both David and Edward. On Wednesday, August 31st, 2011, officers from the Massachusetts State Police and the Pittsfield Police Department entered the house in search for any evidence or clues in connection with the 3 missing men. In addition to this, they also canvassed the local neighborhood, hoping that someone may have a clue to go on. Not too long after this, several concerning reports started to roll in. Multiple bystanders noticed 2 men throwing several items into the local river. These items included some white socks, a few empty Price Chopper bags, an empty shoebox, and a pair of shoes. Now, following the storm, the river was overflowing and particularly fast. And while one of the bystanders saw the men throwing these items into the river, one of the men said, "The river should carry these things pretty far. They will be hard to find." After overhearing this conversation, these people reported what they'd witnessed to the police. However, at the time, who these men were, nobody was sure. Okay, so we're getting to the complicated part of this case, so what I'm going to try to do is explain this to you in the most simple and accurate way. So I want you to focus on David Glasser, as unfortunately he's the common denominator between all characters in this story. It turns out that at the time of his disappearance, David was gravely concerned for his safety for several weeks already, and you may have already picked up on the hint I left earlier on in the story. Just
Yeah.
2 weeks after his disappearance, David was scheduled to testify against a man named Adam Hall, a local gang leader he had several years of bad history with. So, to begin with, who exactly is Adam Hall? Well, quite frankly,
So that was Adam Hall in the house with them two. You know, it was two unknown men in the house with David, and I can't think of the other dude name right now. But was it Adam? Was it the gang leaders in there? Cause see, the reason I'm asking that is because I ain't gonna say they was calm, cool, and collected. Cause the lady said she heard them being loud and banging shit or whatever. But just the fact that David would even allow Adam to come in his house with no problem. You know what I'm saying? It seemed like he wouldn't even let him in there, right? But maybe he was intimidated. I don't know. Let's go.
Venomous snake is the most adequate description. Starting with the basics, Adam was a high-ranking member of the local Hells Angels gang, and while that certainly does not make him a bad person, the way he conducted his business does. Scaling back to the year 1997, he was convicted of assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. But after this, and outside of a few motor vehicle offences, he remained off the radar until the year 2009. He used his status to bribe, bully and bullshit his way through a variety of situations. He was a man who threatened and even physically assaulted those who stood in his way. And sadly, this included David Glasser. By the way, and just a random side note, but after spending about half an hour trying to locate Adam's address, I was finally able to pinpoint it through Google Maps. And let me tell you, anyone who drove by this property could tell that the owner was up to no good. Living in a rickety home, Adam often used his caravan to block his driveway, with a second caravan blocking a side entrance and barbed wire between the two. Now honestly, this place was like a fortress, and it makes you wonder what he was hiding or protecting himself from. We'll get to more of that in just a moment. Going back to his job as a scrap collector, David often sold his metal to a place named Pearlman Scrapyard. It was in mid-July of 2009 that he sold some wire and motor parts which had been found abandoned on a street. A customer later recognized these parts as belonging to Adam, and after being informed about this, Adam became enraged. Since David sometimes came over to Adam's house to do the odd job here and there, he knew exactly who he was. And after luring David back to his home, which is located in Peru, Massachusetts, he unfortunately beat the living daylights out of him, leaving David entirely swollen. Following the assault, Adam demanded that David gave him his pickup truck for free as a token of punishment, and furthermore, if he told the police about any of this, he promised he would murder him. The entire situation was traumatic for David, and he never intended to steal from Adam. He likely never did, but Adam didn't care. Following some persuasion from his social worker and several friends, David eventually went to the police, and in return, authorities would visit Adam at his home. And after arriving at his house, the authorities charged Adam with intimidation, kidnapping, assault, and, after finding a huge amount of cocaine, possession too. Now, obviously, these charges were not good for Adam or his reputation. Not that this mattered in the beginning, as he remained behind bars. But on September 30th, 2009, around 10 weeks after being arrested, he was released on a $50,000 bond. I wonder where he got that money from. Adam's trial was scheduled to commence sometime in the future, with David Glasser expected to take the stand and testify against him. But Adam was not willing to let this happen, and so he began to scheme a way to discredit David. Ranging from framing David for stealing the scrap metal, right through to framing him for sexual assault, he eventually settled on allegations of kidnap. You see, the plan was simple. Adam asked his girlfriend to hire David to drive her to a rest stop in New York, and when they arrived, she would run for help to the authorities. In addition to this, Adam asked a friend to fire several bullets into a tree near the rest area before they arrived, and while they were busy in the convenience store, plant the gun in David's vehicle to make it look like he'd threatened her with a gun. Officers eventually caught up with David, where they found a revolver and Adam's girlfriend's purse in his truck. And, of course, he was arrested immediately. As you can probably imagine, David was very upset and confused at the situation, and he insisted that he must have been framed. And after a few days, the authorities did look into these claims. So after checking local surveillance footage and analysing Adam's cell phone data, they confronted him and his friends about their plot. And that's when the scheme started to unravel. Adam was once again arrested by the authorities, and if he wanted bond this time, he would have to cough up $250,000.
And he probably got that 250K, man. When he dealing with that cocaine, so he more than likely gonna put up bail again. But I'm tripping off this dude actually framed David. Like he was trying to frame him not to get caught. And then I guess he just said, fuck it. Well, I might as well just go and kill him like I told him if he ever told the police. And that's another thing, y'all. How many people out there, like, we got to give David some kind of kudos or props or whatever the word is, because this man snitched on a big time gang member. Not everybody out there doing that shit. So, I mean, gotta give him props. Gotta be like, hey, he kept it real. Hey, David kept it 100.
In one of the more unbelievably ridiculous parts of this story, Adam was terrified that these new charges would ruin his reputation, and so he requested a special meeting with the FBI to strike up a deal. During this meeting, he offered to become an informant against the Hells Angels and his local drug gang, and in exchange he would get leniency for his sentencing. But spoiler alert, the FBI were not too keen on hiring a rat, and
ain't that very ironic? I was just talking about how David goddamn told on what the name, Adam. And come to find out, Adam, he part of a gang and he snitching on his homeboy, ready to sing like a bird or whatever the fuck that terminology is. That I'm like, damn, bro. I'm giving Adam credit because of what he doing, because he possibly know that him snitching can get him in trouble. But at the same time, David, no, I'm getting my damn people mixed up, y'all. Excuse me. I'm giving David credit for snitching, knowing that shit could possibly come back and bite, like in his life type shit. And Adam doing it out here willy nilly, like he don't give a fuck. It's just the what different ways that people, what they going through in their life, and at the end of the day, they still doing the same fucking thing. Let's go.
his offer was ultimately rejected. Believe it or not, but Adam was eventually able to cough up the $250,000 bond. This was thanks to the local chapter of the Hells Angels posting their entire clubhouse in surety. Now, I find this incredibly ironic. One moment, he's planning to take them down by ratting on them to the FBI, and the next, he's being rescued by them. Honestly, this man has one of the weakest sense of morality and loyalty that I've ever read about. So
He ain't lying, bro. That's ironic too. He was about to snitch on y'all. Y'all end up putting up y'all damn clubhouse for him? Wow.
when David suddenly disappeared 5 months later, and only 2 weeks before he was scheduled to testify against Adam, detectives were gravely concerned when reports came in of a man throwing clothes into a river. A man who also seemed to fit Adam's physical description. And tragically, they had every reason to be concerned, because 2 weeks later, a hauntingly grisly scene would be unearthed. Located 13 miles southeast of Pittsfield lies a small town named Beckett. One of the residents, named Cole, who lived on Woodmere Road, was having some heavy landscaping work conducted in his garden. In fact, this satellite image on Google Maps highlights how much was going on there. Now, Cole had hired several people to do the work for him, which included a man named David Casey. David Casey, who I will only call as Casey from now on, was responsible for rough grading and removal of tree stumps. It was on Monday the 29th of August that Cole travelled to work at 5 AM, before returning home at around 5 PM that evening. Upon his return, he noticed some muddy tracks going out into the dense woodland. And so, out of curiosity, Cole asked Casey, "Looks like the excavator was moved. Did you move it?" Casey shook his head and said no, kicking some rocks as he put his head down. A few days later, while visiting his family in Florida, Cole received a phone call from the police. It was a bit of a strange request, but they asked him if they could search his property. Now, Cole had nothing to hide, so he gladly agreed. But only when he returned home the next day did he realise the gravity of the situation. Dozens upon dozens of officers were scattered across his garden, and police tapes surrounded the entire area. And in the heart of it all were several marked excavators. About 20 feet or 6 meters deep, they had shockingly found a mass burial site, and within it were the bodies of David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell. More than a dozen bags containing their body parts were found, one of which contained all 3 of their heads. The clothing found contained holes and tears consistent with those made by knives and bullets. And, as you can expect, this matched those found on the bodies. Casey, who was the man working on Cole's property, had turned himself into police a couple days prior. He confessed that, while being threatened with his life, he helped 3 men concealed their bodies. And of course, one of those 3 men was Adam Hall. By September 12th, 2011, all...
Bro, that shit, they're brutal, bro. They chopped up 3 bodies, put them in bags, then buried them on somebody else's property. Lord have mercy, man. It's some fucked up ways you can go out. It's some fucked up ways for you to been lived all the years you lived and you die like that. And that's the end. That's how your body end up. You know what I'm saying? Like, damn, bro. Whew.
All 3 were arrested on 3 counts of murder, kidnapping and witness intimidation. And to add to this, David Casey was also arrested on 3 counts of accessory after the fact to murder and kidnapping. This is probably the right time to introduce you to the main man this video is titled after. Not the most upsetting part of the story, but certainly the most disturbing. And his name is Caius Phaeovis. So, where do I begin with Caius? Born in the year 1980, Caius was 31 years old at the time of the murders. And it's probably no surprise, but the name Caius Phaeovis is not actually his given birth name. Legally changed in the year 2008, his original name was Roy Gutfinski. And to be honest with you, I can kind of see why he wanted to change his name. No offense to the other Gutfinskis out there. But why a name like Caius Phaeovis? Well, Phaeovis is an ancient Roman god, and apparently the name Caius comes from Gaius, a Roman emperor. Now, there are several ways you can pronounce his name. For example, Caius can also be pronounced as Caius, but it seems that most of the courtroom footage pronounces it as Caius, which of course doesn't sound similar to the Roman Emperor Gaius. Anyway, this was not Caius's first stint in the spotlight. Back in the year 1999, Caius made headlines after he and his former girlfriend were arrested over charges of assault. Prosecutors claimed that both of them lured a 16-year-old girl into their motel room, where they then tied her up, sliced her back open with a razor blade, and then ritualistically licked her blood while kissing each other. The authorities were called when the victim turned up at a hospital with a 7-inch gash that needed more than 30 stitches to close. During his trial, Caius claimed that he was a vampire and a Satan worshipper, and claimed to like the taste of his own blood and drink others. Now, both he and his girlfriend were guilty of these allegations and were sentenced to 10 years behind bars. However, they would both only serve 3. After being released on parole, and in the year 2006, he was arrested once again on charges of kidnapping and drug possession, and held 2 strippers hostage in a hotel room. Now, these kidnapping charges were eventually dropped, but Caius was sent back to prison for violating his probation. Anyway, one of the most intriguing things about Caius comes down to his distinctive facial features, and you're probably wondering why he has them. Amongst other unusual characters tattooed on his face, the number 666 rests between several subdermal implants on his forehead. Now, of course, this is referred to as the number of the devil, and his implants are there to resemble horns. He also has 2 piercings on the bridge of his nose, and a further stretched piercing through his nasal septum. His ears are surgically altered to make them appear elf-like, and his cheeks and neck have been burned to create patterns in the skin, a procedure that is known and called scarification. Caius would also intimidate people over the scars on his arms too. Whenever he caught people looking at them, he would say, "See these scars? Now imagine what I can do to somebody else."
Man, that dude look like a fucking clown. That what he look like to me. He look like Bozo brother or something. That shit ain't scary. That shit just, you look ridiculous, dude. You done fucked your face up.
After his arrest, authorities turned to the homes of all 3 suspects to see what they could find. And although there wasn't a huge amount of incriminating evidence found in Caius's apartment, they sure were in for a shock. Living in an apartment at 10 Cloverdale Street outside of Pittsfield, Caius lived in very cheap accommodation at the end of a runway. Everything inside was painted black, including the walls, floors, and doors. Hell's Angels memorabilia was scattered throughout the room, and anatomical drawings from medical textbooks hung on the walls. Scary enough, this included images of human dissections and amputation of body parts. Ammunition boxes, fake skulls, and a mobile phone with the battery removed were all discovered. Detectives also found a machete, a cleaver, a sickle, various army knives, a pack of black and mild cigars, and 2 baseball bats with spikes driven through them. Excluding the baseball bats, most of these items were consistent with the types of tools used against David, Edward, and Robert. Almost in a trophy-like manner, but inside of a separate metal box, they found a newspaper article dated from September the 6th, which described the disappearance of all 3 men. In addition to this, they also found another article from September the 8th, describing the ongoing search for them. Now, it is worth mentioning our third and, relatively speaking, most mundane accomplice in this case. Living 20 miles north of Pittsfield in North Adams and 44 years old at the time, Shalhoub was a good friend of Adams. He had known him for several years and was often found at the Hells Angels clubhouse. But otherwise, I don't really know what to tell you. The man was as dull as ditch water. Following their arrests, all 3 men pleaded not guilty to all counts of murder, kidnapping and witness intimidation. And so Adam, Shalhoub and Caius would all face the judge and jury in their own separate trials. The evidence available at the disposal of the prosecution varied slightly from case to case, but through all 3 trials, a highly damning and grim story was unearthed. In the months, weeks, and then days leading up to the disappearance of David, Robert, and Edward, Adam Hall repeatedly told friends and acquaintances that David Glasser had to disappear. In mid-August of 2011, Adam Hall purchased an old Buick SUV for $500 from a mechanic. The vehicle ran well, but nothing to write home about. Several days later, on August 24th, Caius was recorded purchasing a hacksaw from a Home Depot in Pittsfield. In the afternoon of Saturday 27th of August, Robert made his way across the street to spend some time with Edward and David Glasser. The wind was picking up speed, and all 3 men were planning to spend some quality time hanging out together. A surveillance camera captured Adam Hall with David Shalhoub and Caius Vovis just 4 hours prior to the other 3 men's disappearances. Witnesses spotted Adam getting into Caius's black Jeep that very same evening, and later that same night, further witnesses placed all 3 men in Caius's home, where they cleaned their guns together. At 10:30 p.m, a neighbour spotted a 4th man through the window of David and Edward's home. It is not confirmed who this person was, but it was likely Adam Hall, and hours later this house would be entirely empty. Sadly, later that night, David Glasser, Edward Frampton and Robert Chadwell were reportedly forced into Adams and Caius's Jeeps. They were then lured out into the woods, and, in the middle of the storm, were murdered in cold blood. All 3 assailants were after David Glasser alone, and for Edward and Robert, it was merely a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yep.
Sparing the details, all 3 men were tortured, stabbed, and eventually shot. And David Casey, the man with the excavator, would later testify that Adam bragged about murdering them. He referred to his 3 victims as the N-slur, the R-slur, and the fat guy. He further said that one of his boys, presumably Caius, really enjoyed torturing and cutting them up. It was raining extremely hard that night, but Adam didn't care at all. He said he felt great about his actions, and apparently slept soundly afterwards. At 5:30 a.m. the following day, a store clerk at the A-Mart in Pittsfield served Adam Hall. He walked in to buy 3 candy bars and a pack of cigarettes. That's 3 candy bars, perhaps for himself and 2 other people. The store clerk noticed that not only were his boots untied and wet, but his blue jeans and even the cash he gave her were wet too, and his shirt was muddy all over. Adam returned back to the store several minutes later, where he purchased a pack of black and mild cigars. And strangely enough, this was the same brand found in Caius's apartment by police. Shortly after this, Adam's girlfriend awoke to the sound of Adam returning home. Inside his own Jeep was Shalhoub, and behind them was another Jeep which belonged to Caius. While making breakfast, Adam gave her money to pay for the food, which she found odd because she recalls the money being both wet and nasty. To add to this, he asked her to wash her hands after handling it. Now, there is no doubt that Shalhoub, Caius and Adam were all together that morning, as several witnesses had seen them, and they all appeared to be sodden, filthy and exhausted. The very next day, Adam Hall pressured David Casey into helping him hide the bodies, and he threatened that, if he didn't do it, he would murder him and his family. After confirming that the property owner was not at...
Hey, I ain't gonna lie though, this case got a lot of Adam threatening, if you don't do this, if you don't do that, then I'ma kill you, I'ma kill your family. Like, it got a lot of framing going on. A lot of, you know what I'm saying? A lot of trying to make you do something, because if you don't do it, then it's gonna end up bad for you. This dude was very manipulative, but it don't excuse the actions of nobody in this case at the same time.
Home. Casey drove the excavator to a clearing in the wooded area and dug a hole about 4 feet deep, 4 feet wide and 8 feet long. Adam drove his Buick behind and dumped the remains of David, Edward and Robert into the hole, in which Casey then recovered with dirt and large rocks. He then returned the excavator to its previous spot, but Adam came back to threaten him one more time. He ordered Casey to keep his mouth shut, and further said that he can make things happen even if he was in jail. The next day, Adam and Shalou brought the Buick to a salvage yard in Lanesborough. They sold the car for scrap and ordered it to be put in the crusher, which the mechanic found quite strange. They then went to buy new boots and clothes, and late that evening, both men were seen laughing and grinning at the clubhouse. The two were clearly very drunk, and statements overheard by the others included, "No, no, don't do it. You should have seen the look on his face," and "the poor bastard had to watch." It was 2 days later that random witnesses noticed both Adam and Shalou throwing boxes of items into the river. The contents of these boxes included white socks, a few empty price chopper bags, an empty shoebox and a pair of shoes. Authorities would later find one of the shoe boxes downstream, and not so coincidentally, it matched the same pair of shoes purchased just a few days prior. Autopsy reports following the discovery of David, Edward and Robert concluded that all three had died terrible deaths. The details are long and stomach-churning, so I won't go into unnecessary detail, but to put it short, all three men had been completely dismembered. Now, the trials for Shalou, Adam and Caius were a total slam dunk. In February 2014, Adam Hall was found guilty on 3 counts of murder, kidnapping and witness intimidation. He was therefore sentenced to 3 life terms in prison, without the possibility of parole. It was also noted that these murders were committed just weeks before David Glasser was scheduled to testify against Adam, and they were certain beyond all doubt that this was the main motive behind his killings. Adam's crimes were described as loathsome, depraved and barbaric, and he deserves no more mercy or consideration than he gave to his victims. Next up was David Shalou, and he too was found guilty and sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Again, there is not much to say about Shalou, a hopelessly boring individual that leaves no positive mark on this world, and will eventually die behind bars. Caius would be the 3rd man to stand trial, and the legal proceedings of this case were both interesting and turbulent to say the least. He was eventually found guilty on all 3 counts of murder, and as soon as the jury read out their verdict, Caius screamed and shouted to say, "I will see you all in hell."
Yeah, I'll see you all in hell, too. Remember that. Every one of you, I'll see you in hell.
After 6 days of deliberation, Caius was found guilty on all 3 counts of murder and kidnapping, and was therefore sentenced to 3 life sentences behind bars, without the possibility of parole. However, he and his defense team were very upset with the verdict, and they strongly argued that the prosecution's case against him was not strong enough. They claimed there was no DNA or murder weapon able to tie Caius to the crime, and although there were several witnesses before and after their deaths, there was a clear lack of physical evidence. They further claimed that the circumstantial evidence was just that, circumstantial, and there ought to be no unreasonable influence on the circumstantial evidence. Caius also claimed that the dissection illustrations in his apartment should not have been used in his trial, and his looks heavily biased the judge and jury against him. To be honest with you, I can see this being a problem here, as we do like to judge at a superficial level. After all, it's part of our nature to do this. However, do I personally think Caius is innocent? Well, looking at all the peripheral evidence available, not at all. Anyway, here's a spectacular video of him throwing a tantrum in court.
When I was first arrested, the police made it clear to me that they did not actually believe I had anything to do with the disappearance and murder of these men, but that they did believe I possessed some knowledge that would greatly assist in their investigation. I've been in isolation for 3 years now. I've refused to talk to the cops. I've turned down all the numerous plea deals offered me from the beginning. Just 1 month before this trial began, D.A. Capos called my attorney, Gavin Reardon, and told me he knew I did not kill these men. He offered me conspiracy after the fact, 7 years. I told my lawyer what I've told him and others many times before. My hand was not in this. I'd rather spend the rest of my life in prison and be able to face myself in the mirror at the end of the day to make that kind of deal. Now here we are today, and he's asking for 3 consecutive life sentences with no parole. Let me make this clear one more time before I sit down. My hand was not in this, all right? My hand wasn't in this. But if anybody thinks I'm going to hang my head today and beg for mercy, they're just as deluded in their thinking as that jury of my peers who convicted me of this. So, Your Honor, take your other stand and do what you plan to do from the beginning. Justice was not served. I'm an innocent man. You condemn an innocent man and I will appeal this.
Getting towards the end of this story, but there aren't too many side notes to this.
I'm looking like, that wasn't convincing enough to me. That wasn't convincing enough to me. Because he, on one hand, saying, I'm innocent, but he not going to give any details of what actually happened. If you so innocent, bro, tell us what exactly happened. He way different than Adam. Because Adam was ready to snitch on the whole goddamn biker group. The whole Hell's Angel at first. And then the Hell's Angel ended up paying for getting him out of the $250K to get him out again. I don't know, that was stupid, but just him, bro. Like you talking out of both sides of your mouth, bro. On one time you saying you're innocent, but on the other hand, you ain't giving no kind of details of why you innocent. Let's finish it up.
This case. Despite it being horrendously complex to explain, the actual process of this case was very cut and dry. It is worth mentioning that David Casey, who helped hide the bodies, pleaded guilty to accessory after the fact of murder. Casey was sentenced to state prison for 30 months, but since he'd already served that time before his release, he was let go immediately. The details behind the lives of our 3 victims is what upsets me the most about this case. Robert's and Edward's lives were cut short, all for the sole reason of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they suffered a cruel and heartless end, all for absolutely nothing. This was the same for David Glasser, but arguably much worse. In the weeks leading up to his death, friends had noticed that he was becoming very scared and frantically paranoid over testifying against Adam. One of his friends recalls, "I could see him not being able to sit down, he'd pace instead. You could see the fear written across his face. He was openly, admittedly terrified of Adam." Friends and acquaintances claim that both the authorities and prosecutors ignored his pleas for protection as a witness. He knew that Adam would come for him, and openly shared these concerns with his lawyer. Now, this wasn't a case of punishment, retribution, or even tit for tat. David Glasser had never wronged Adam Hall. He was just a scrap collector in the local area, and this entire story developed from some false information given to Adam. The story should have ended there, but sadly, Adam Hall is a stone-cold, impulsive lowlife monster. He chose to believe this information blindly, neglecting to actually heed the truth. And furthermore, he reacted in the most barbaric of ways. He senselessly beat David, threatened him, framed him, terrorized him for the last 3 years of his life, and then, finally, murdered him and his 2 friends. It is absolutely wild when you think about it. A false identification of scrap parts led to the lives of 3 men being lost and a further 4 in prison. David Glasser was a well-loved man who was very popular in Pittsfield. He had a good and compassionate heart and was reliable at getting the odd jobs done. And despite rarely having any money, he often made the effort to buy gifts for his friends and their children. In the year 2005, he sent a letter to an editor working for the local newspaper in an effort to spark an awareness of how we treat each other. In his first sentence, David said he was mentally and physically challenged, but his main point was to bring an awareness of how we treat one another. His physician of 20 years called him kind and generous, humble and courageous, and said he was a man who overcame many challenges and special hardships to stand tall among us. And Edward was equally likable and noble. He was someone who liked to take care of others, and his death left a very personal loss for all of those who loved him. Many were touched by his love and his humour, but on a much larger educational scale, his death also leaves a gap in the understanding of the early disability world. Robert Chadwell was another man who was unable to know that he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He is described as a happy-go-lucky man who was also well-known and well-liked, and sadly, he now leaves a child behind. To be honest with you, I can't even believe this case happened, and the consequences behind just stealing some scrap motorbike parts is astounding. At the end of the day, all 3 men were planning to enjoy a storm together, and how this weekend full of fun and excitement can turn into one so grisly is absolutely devastating. Anyway folks, I'm going to wrap this case up here, so thank you so
Yeah, that shit was just devastating, y'all. That shit devastating on a lot of different levels, man. This one right here just got me just sad more than anything. Just devastated because, first of all, 2 of them dudes, like Adrian said, they was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They ain't even have nothing to do with this shit. Then, even David, man, it's just sad for him, bro, that it's like he seen his death before it happened. Like, he pretty much knew that man was gonna kill him. And that shit actually happened. And then, it's sad that he didn't give all the details, but I can just tell, man, and my mind just imagining the way they went out. They forced them out of David and Edward house into they Jeep. I think it was a Jeep, SUV, whatever. Drove them out to this land that ain't nobody else on, and ain't like they just shot them in the head or stabbed them and they dead or cut their throat or nothing. They tortured them guys, man. Cutting off body parts. Ain't no telling what type of body parts they were cutting off. You know what I'm saying, bro? Like, they could have been cutting all their fingers off one by one. And then, if y'all remember too, some witnesses was talking at the bar. Well, they said they heard them talking at the bar about the murder, and they was like, one of the dudes said poor bastard had to watch or something. So they just let you know that while they torturing one person to death, the other two watching. Like, how fucked up, like this fucked up how they had to go out, man. This is sad, man. This is sad. I'm glad the motherfucker got life. The dude who ended up burying the bodies in the backyard, I feel like he should have got more time than he got. But overall, just a story that just seemed like it ain't have to go down like this, bro. You ain't have to kill that man. It's been over some scrap metal, over allegedly he's stealing from you. I digress, my people. I'm done, man. I'm gonna let y'all get up out of here, bro. I love fucking with y'all, man. I appreciate y'all coming back as always. Make sure you hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and do all that for me. And I think tomorrow we back to Mr. Ballin'. If he put up a video on Saturday like he done did the last couple Saturdays, then it's Mr. Ballin' time tomorrow. But until I see y'all tomorrow, my friends, I got a couple of more things to say. Love, peace, and happiness. Stay safe. Don't stop. Keep going. Yeah.